This weekend, the Armory in St. Louis is hosting a silent auction and raffle to help raise money for a new local veterans charity to open here in St. Louis. Our political editor, Mark Maxwell, talked to the high-ranking Army veteran behind it all. Mark?
And it's not every day you get to talk with a command sergeant major in the U.S. Army, someone who was so high-ranking he was often called on to testify on Capitol Hill about military operations in Afghanistan. He said that transition home, the way we left, took a mental toll on him, but his work now helps alleviate that burden on his fellow soldiers making that same trip home. Tim Metheny is a man on a mission.
No time to waste.
That mission started out here in St. Louis more than 3 decades ago when he first walked into these doors to enlist in the U.S. Army.
My first plane flight ever was out of St. Louis to basic training.
His travels took him to Iraq, where he earned a Purple Heart when shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade pierced his jaw, and eventually to Afghanistan, where he became the command sergeant major overseeing American troops, sometimes pinning medals on them for their valor.
When you see a young man that's been shot in the hip and shot through the face, and he's completely sedated, and the general and I go in to put his Purple Heart on him, and this guy's trying to sit up in a hospital bed and trying to salute the general.
It was in between deployments when tragedy struck during a stateside stint at Fort Hood.
Worst day of my life. And like I said, I've lost 147 people in combat, and that was the worst day of my life.
That morning at breakfast was the last time he'd ever see his son, Zach.
My daughter called me or texted me and said, Zach's not at school. He wasn't on the bus. And so then we started looking, and then they found him about an hour and a half later. He had gone across the street and shot himself. He was 14.
It's that same unimaginable grief that devastates veterans' families all too often.
We lost close to 5,500 people in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Over the last 20 years, we've lost close to 21,000 to suicide.
That's what motivates his new mission.
We try to prevent veteran suicide by, if you're getting evicted from your house.
Metheny works for USA Cares, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting veterans from financial ruin.
We've stopped the sheriff's department from coming to a house as it was going down.
He says the demand for help is only growing in an economy where poverty and inflation are on the rise.
Sooner or later, it just weighs you down. Every one of those stressors comes in, and then you get to the point where you're like, well, I'm a failure. I'm unsuccessful. Especially if you've been, served in Iraq and Afghanistan, you got to feel like, well, why'd I do that? I spent years away from my family, and I went there. It cost me a son. It cost me a marriage. And then you come back and you go, why?
With a new chapter opening in the town where his mission all began.
I feel like I'm back on the team again.
Tim Metheny is still looking out for his fellow soldiers. And if you thank him for his service, he'd say something like this.
Now, this country's worth it. It absolutely is.
If you're wondering how you can help, Jim Beam and the Armory are hosting that Toast to the Troops tomorrow from 11 to 4. Some big auction items up for grabs there at that silent auction and raffle. Even a share of all the drink sales will go to help veterans and their families. If you can't make it there in person, there's a link up on ksdk.com right now with how you can help veterans, help fight veteran suicide.